He suddenly had an idea and quickly flipped the bicycle handlebar upward, then bent down to lie flat on the frame. Unexpectedly, the speed suddenly increased, and he instantly pulled ahead of his friend. When his friend asked for the secret, he remained silent. After returning home, he immediately disassembled the washing machine to take out the high-speed bearing, then welded various scrap materials together, finally carefully assembling his ideal racing bike. However, when his friends saw this oddly shaped bicycle, they couldn't help but feel worried he was planning to ride it to break the world record. Race cars are all meticulously designed with computer assistance and cost up to £500,000, but the racing bike he built was worth less than £50. But surprisingly, not only did he break the world record twice with this seemingly old bike, but he also became the famous Scottish flyer. Even more unbelievable is that this is a true story. Graeme has been introverted and socially awkward since childhood, often bullied by peers. This experience left an indelible shadow in his heart and gradually fostered a sense of inferiority and timidity. Despite his police officer father repeatedly asking who the bullies were, he never had the courage to identify them. Fortunately, his father stopped pressuring him and instead gave Graeme a bicycle for Christmas. This bike not only allowed him to escape bullies with speed, but also brought brief comfort to his lonely childhood. Time, like a wheel, keeps turning, and in the blink of an eye, it was 1993. 28-year-old Graeme had a family and children, but childhood trauma still caused him severe depression. He struggled for a long time with low mood and mental oppression, often hearing unsettling hallucinations, and only cycling could bring him momentary relief. To this end, Graeme participated as an amateur cyclist in various British cycling competitions, unexpectedly winning the national championship. Although Graeme gained some reputation in the industry, his life remained difficult. To support his family, he also worked in courier delivery and ran a bicycle shop. Due to malicious competition from peers, Graeme was forced to lower prices, with customers only willing to pay £200 for a £300 product. To reduce losses, he reluctantly accepted and offered home delivery, but the man said, "The bicycle's speed is clearly not comparable to a car." This remark sparked Graeme's competitive spirit. He immediately bet, if the man arrives at the destination first by car, he would get the bicycle free. Otherwise, he would pay the original price of £300. Graeme even invited Pastor Hageman to witness to ensure fairness. The man readily accepted this seemingly straightforward race, and a bicycle versus car race began. At first, the man easily left Graeme behind, but Graeme was determined and ignored traffic rules, running through red lights to overtake. The man, anxious, drove his truck at Ferrari-like high speeds, but Graeme skillfully navigated shortcuts on his bike. Just when the man thought he was sure to win, Graeme suddenly appeared from another route, and the two vehicles, unwilling to yield, collided abruptly. Graeme was uninjured, but did not win the bet, losing £200 without regret. He always adhered to the principle of seize opportunities and take a gamble, and this persistence inspired Hageman, making Hageman an important supporter in Graeme's pursuit of his dreams. The next day, Graeme continued his courier delivery work. His friend Malky was puzzled. Graeme is a well-known cyclist. Why is he doing courier work? It's a waste of talent. He calmly responded, "Fame can't fill my stomach, nor can it pay my bills." Hearing this, Malky could only sigh lightly. After work, the two rode together on the road as usual. During a break, Malky took out a magazine featuring famous racer Chris Boardman, who was about to break his 9-year-old world record. Upon hearing this, Graeme, who had comparable strength to Chris Boardman, was instantly ignited with fighting spirit. His first priority was to solve the problem of increasing riding speed. Inspired, Graeme decided to flip the handlebars upward. After returning home, Graeme and Malky immediately went to a scrapyard to steal materials, but this process was witnessed by Hageman from start to finish. However, Hageman not only had no intention of reporting them, but also asked about their plans with interest. Graeme excitedly explained, bending down to reduce air resistance is in line with aerodynamics for skiers, and cyclists can learn from it. He wants to build an unprecedented bicycle to break the 1-hour endurance record. Malky, however, said they had no money to buy materials, no place to build the bike, and most importantly, challenging the record required renting a world-class indoor truck. But Graeme believed none of these were problems. He had already arranged for Malky to be his agent to secure sponsorship, and Hageman was willing to provide a warehouse as his bike-building base. The trio was officially formed. When they toasted, Graeme was even more determined to complete the challenge a week before Chris Boardman, meaning he only had 8 weeks left. Graeme began hellish training. Hageman was very worried about his health. High-intensity riding for an hour seemed to ordinary people like suicide. Graeme solemnly said, "Champions of cycling competitions throughout history have endured harsh training, but still forge ahead, all for the glorious moment of creating miracles." He devoted all his time to developing and training his bicycle. Having long since stopped courier work, his already strained family situation became even more difficult. However, his wife, Anne, not only had no complaints, but also volunteered to work overtime to supplement the family income. Perhaps behind every successful man, there is such a silently dedicated wife. And Graeme did not let Anne down. He trained every day and optimized the bicycle he was building based on his training experiences. Finally, after repeated improvements, Graeme's perfect bicycle was born. But as he looked at the assembled bicycle in front of him, the others present were amazed, only and encouraging Graeme. However, Malky still accompanied Graeme to complete the road test. As a result, because the chosen route was too dangerous, the two had their first disagreement. Malky thought the bike looked very unstable. If Graeme's bike fell apart during riding, Graeme could very likely lose his life. But Graeme didn't care and even believed that the bike fully conformed to the laws of physics. Since they couldn't reach a consensus, they ultimately parted ways unhappily. Rejected, Graeme became gloomy and anxious inside. Originally, Graeme wanted to confide in Hageman, but after arriving at the church, he left feeling disappointed because he suddenly felt that this was a sign of cowardice. Meanwhile, Malky acted as if nothing had happened, continuing to seek sponsorship support everywhere. Initially, Malky faced repeated rejections, even when pretending to be a social elite. His constrained demeanor quickly revealed his true self. When Malky was about to give up, a friend introduced him to a well-known billionaire, and Malky immediately established contact with this billionaire. During the meeting, the billionaire listened with great interest, and Malky became more engaged in explaining. Unexpectedly, at the next moment, the other person suddenly took off his clothes on the spot. Malky mistakenly thought he was about to face some kind of exploitation, even seriously considering whether he should sacrifice for his friend's dream. However, the billionaire quickly changed into sportswear. Turns out, this billionaire was also a cycling enthusiast and had heard about Graeme long ago. After Malky fully explained the situation to the billionaire, he readily agreed to sponsor. Since the rental cycling venue was located in Norway, Malky used the remaining sponsorship funds to buy plane tickets from the UK to Norway for Graeme and his wife, while he personally traveled there at his own expense. Soon, Graeme faced the challenge day. But just as Graeme was about to assemble his bike and compete, Malky suddenly called him aside, and a brand new professional racing bike immediately caught his eye. It turned out that Malky, considering Graeme's safety, had persuaded the sponsor to create a 1:1 replica of his bike. As long as Graeme rode this bike to break the world record, he would receive a year's worth of sponsorship. At first, Graeme hesitated because the new bike was much heavier than his old one, making it more tiring to ride. But in order not to disappoint his friend's good intentions, Graeme ultimately chose to compromise. While waiting, the record holder of the event and senior officials from the Cycling Association approached. They initially doubted Graeme, but because of his unique bike, they still asked a few questions. Graeme thought they suspected the bicycle did not meet the standards, so Graeme immediately guaranteed it fully complied with WCF rules. Unexpectedly, they showed no concern for the bicycle at all, only caring whether Graeme could break the world record. When the referee's countdown ended, Graeme pedaled hard to accelerate to break the world record. He had to run 51 kilometers within an hour, which meant completing 205 laps around the track. The process initially went relatively smoothly, but the heavy bike significantly drained Graeme's stamina, causing him to be out of breath before halfway through the race. Worse still, the monotonous track made it difficult for Graeme, who had trained abroad for years, to adapt. As Graeme's strength gradually depleted, the demons from his childhood whispered maliciously once again, and noticed her husband's abnormality and tried to shout to wake Graeme's sleeping mind. Everyone knew that with Graeme's current speed, he had no hope of breaking the record anymore. Sure enough, when the finish bell rang, Graeme was still 2 laps short of completing the race. The senior officials of the cycling association watched the scene and took pleasure in their misfortune. But Graeme, who had exhausted his last bit of strength for his dream, could not accept this result, and comforted her husband not to be discouraged and encouraged him that there would be opportunities in the future. But Graeme knew he hadn't fully exerted his strength. After calming his mind, he voluntarily requested to try again at 9 a.m. the next morning. Although the association's senior officials were very reluctant and even dismissed Graeme with rules, the venue rented by Graeme would not expire until 10:30 a.m. the next morning, so he was fully entitled to continue using it before then. Thus, Graeme secured a second chance. Competing in 2 high-intensity events within such a short period is even challenging for marathon runners. But Graeme was unwilling to give up. That night, he kept drinking water, using his bladder as an alarm clock, waking himself every 2 hours to train, just to keep his legs in the best condition. Meanwhile, Malky believed that his last-minute car replacement caused Graeme's failure in the challenge. Feeling guilty all night, he merged and optimized the 2 cars overnight. The next morning, Graeme was deeply moved when he saw this, and then they hurriedly headed to the venue. But it was not until 9:30 that the staff arrived tardily. Perhaps out of mutual respect among competitors, the former champion advised Graeme, "This could very likely cause muscle dissolution. Don't ruin yourself out of impulse." But Graeme firmly arrived at the starting line. His deep-seated faith, the strong support of his friends, and his wife's unconditional trust all transformed into strength on the track. Graeme, like a red lightning bolt, surged forward, the sound of wind breaking echoing through the venue, his resilient while inspiring everyone present. And Malky cheered passionately. Even the former champion couldn't help but start cheering for Graeme. At this moment, gunfire suddenly rang out, signaling that Graeme was only 1 lap away from completing the challenge. Despite his body nearing its limit, the fruits of victory were within reach. Even with his mind clouded, his speed did not diminish in the slightest. In the end, Graeme successfully broke the world record that had stood for 9 years, and everyone present cheered with joy. The sponsor even handed him a check for £140,000 in prize money and promised to provide sponsorship for Graeme for the next year. All the glory and honor belonged to the unyielding Graeme in that moment. But just as everyone raised their glasses to celebrate Graeme, he quietly retreated to a dark corner. Malky saw this and wanted to approach and ask about his condition, but was stopped by N. Graeme, haunted by childhood nightmares, could never fully join the cheers of the crowd and understood his feelings and was willing to give him space to process these emotions. A week later, the famous cyclist Chris Boardman began a new challenge, and her friends watched on TV while Graeme chose to go cycling outdoors. An hour later, Chris Boardman broke Graeme's record, and his championship title lasted only a week. Worse still, the sky suddenly opened up with heavy rain, and his bike had a flat tire in the rain. Helpless, Graeme had no choice but to carry his bike to a nearby bar and use the phone to seek help from Malky. At this moment, several thugs who were drinking suddenly provoked Graeme. They were the bullies who had often bullied Graeme in childhood, not only cursing him, but also blocking his way just like in the past. But this time, Graeme did not back down. Instead, he raised his bike in resistance. After all these years, Graeme finally learned what his father had taught him, to face it bravely. The once arrogant thugs were all subdued by Graeme's aura, trembling and watching as he turned and left. Back home, Graeme immediately decided to participate in a bicycle pursuit race with Chris Boardman in 5 weeks, vowing to reclaim his championship honor. Malky understood his mindset, but suggested postponing to the end of the year, so he could have more time for training and secure more sponsorship resources. But Graeme insisted on seizing the moment. Only pressure could keep him at his peak. 5 weeks later, Graeme competed on his homemade bicycle, while Chris Boardman's racing bike was a computer-designed, full carbon fiber model worth £500,000, making the hardware disparity obvious. Moreover, Graeme was originally a long-distance rider, excelling in endurance, but this 4-kilometer pursuit was about explosive power, in which he had no advantage. But Graeme was fearless. Legends are forged by people, and impossible is meant to be broken. That is the miracle. Graeme ultimately did not live up to himself nor the expectations of others. He won the race with a 2.38-second lead and broke the world record once again. In front of the TV, his wife was so excited she danced with joy. Hageman, watching the live broadcast, was genuinely proud of Graeme. Even his opponent, Chris Boardman, presented him with an expensive helmet as a sign of admiration and respect. Perhaps this is the true meaning of sportsmanship. After returning home, Graeme received official recognition from the government, and the people affectionately called him the Scottish Flyer. At that moment, Graeme truly felt the glory of being a champion, a wonderful feeling of being appreciated and encouraged by everyone. However, clouds always gather around stars. Members of the Cycling Association were deeply dissatisfied. If broken-down junk assembled from trash could break world records, who would still buy their materials at high prices? Therefore, profit-driven capitalists immediately held a press conference, claiming that Graeme's designed racing car was too dangerous. If he fell, it would threaten other competitors, and its use must be completely banned. Moreover, for the same reason, they suspended Graeme for 6 months. Although Graeme explained to the media, he could not withstand the sharp edge of power, and a sense of frustration naturally arose. Fortunately, and always stood by Graeme's side, encouraging him, despair cannot solve the problem. Only facing difficulties head-on can turn the tide. Within support, Graeme quickly found a solution. When the association claimed his car was unsafe, he added 2 auxiliary wheels to the rear. When the association issued a new rule that the seat must be 5 centimeters long, he was not angry, but immediately sawed off the seat. When the association required the bike to be complete and use commercially available parts, he found substitutes on civilian bikes. Faced with the association's endless difficulties, Graeme always managed to resolve them one by one. Graeme struggled to qualify for the championship, but the association imposed further restrictions, banning the low crouch position, warning him if his chest touched the handlebars, and disqualifying him after 3 warnings. Despite his best efforts to adjust his posture during the race, he received 2 warnings from the judges. Helplessly, Graeme could only focus all his energy on his posture, which directly caused him to lose balance and fall on the track. The legendary flyer fell from the throne. In the days that followed, Graeme sank into self-doubt, spending every day either drinking alone at home or staring at his poster in a daze. That day, Graeme repeatedly watched footage of his fall on TV. The villain who once humiliated him was like a fly blocking the door, trampling on his dignity at will. His previous success had given Graeme the courage to resist, but now failure had brought him back to the bottom. Unable to bear it any longer, Graeme carried his beloved bicycle into the dark depths of the forest, determined to end his humiliating life. Fortunately, God did not abandon Graeme. At a critical moment, the rope snapped and passing cyclists discovered him and took him to the hospital. And, who arrived in a panic after hearing the news, was afraid that the tragedy would repeat itself and asked Graeme to see a psychologist. But Graeme still dared not face his inner scars and stubbornly believed he could handle everything. Although, and was furious upon hearing this, she also knew that forcing him would only backfire, so she stopped persuading him. After a long while, Graeme gradually awakened from his despair and began to reevaluate his life. Looking at Anne, who devoted everything for her family and children, Graeme felt full of guilt and promised to continue working in courier delivery to support the family. Meanwhile, the Norwegian Sports Hall specially sent an old floorboard of historical significance, commemorating Graeme's glorious achievements created there. It shows that life is not only full of endless hardships, but also surprises that come unexpectedly. Hageman's words rekindled Graeme's hope. Because the town's church was about to be demolished, Hageman hoped to help Graeme escape his predicament before leaving. Hageman pointed to a photo on the wall and said, "This is his late wife." She, like Graeme, felt surrounded by a swamp due to severe depression and was ultimately swallowed by darkness. He often thought that if he had discovered her abnormality earlier and listened patiently, she might not have left. To make up for the regret and save more people, Hageman chose to become a pastor. Graeme politely expressed that confiding was meaningless because it couldn't change the established facts. Hageman, however, asked Graeme, "How do you know the outcome if you don't try?" For the first time, Graeme opened his heart. Being humiliated had made him sink into self-contempt, believing he was useless, so he constantly challenged himself to repair his broken inner world. Unexpectedly, he was set up by capital, and although he failed not due to lack of ability, it dealt a heavy blow to his already low self-confidence. After understanding Graeme's inner thoughts, Hageman did not offer much comfort, but firmly told him, "Be brave and move forward like when you first learned to ride a bike. All darkness will be left behind." Graeme suddenly realized that he initially found hope in life through cycling, so how could he give up easily now? At home, Graeme saw a drawing by his son. The picture depicted not only a superhero, but also the image of himself in his son's heart. To not let his family and himself down, Graeme decided to challenge the world champion once again. Afterward, he trained obsessively, striving to return to peak condition. In the blink of an eye, on the day of the World Championship final, Graeme once again stepped onto the stage amid cheers. Learning from the previous lesson, Graeme installed a cushion on the handlebars to cope with the regulation that the chest could not touch the handlebars with both hands. As the gunshot sounded, the race officially began. Although his opponents were younger and more explosive, Graeme was not worried. He was not fighting against others, but against his own cowardice inside. Meanwhile, Hageman prayed for him by the tranquil lake. Family members gathered in a bar cheering for him and shouted from the audience, and Malky stood by the track encouraging him. The entire crowd cheered Graeme the Flying Man, and everyone's belief was united as one, pulling him forward in pursuit of his dreams. Graeme felt this strength, and now every heartbeat in his chest was more determined than ever. The dark days will eventually pass, and all disappointments will become light as a feather. No one is born with armor, but resilient perseverance can make one invincible. In the end, Graeme won the World Championship for the second time, crushing every doubt with his strength. His opponents embraced him in respect, and the high officials of the association solemnly awarded him the well-deserved honor. On the boat, Hageman raised a glass in celebration, and everyone present, including TV viewers, cheered enthusiastically for Graeme's outstanding achievement. Graeme quietly sat on his bike, writing down the names of everyone who had helped him as a way to thank them for their salvation.